Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. And Michelle and Mayor, thank you. This has been one of our most requested programs, so thank you for being here and for being part of it. Let's start a little bit about both what you're doing in education, but would you give us your thoughts about what is the state of public education in America today?
Who's going first? Me. She's the boss. The real answer is it sucks. I mean, we're nowhere near where we need to be. I mean, there should be an outrage. There should be a national crisis. We should all be waving the flag and doing everything that we can. Just think about this. The children that are in school today will be the first generation that are less educated than their parents. That, to me, is alarming, that in the richest, most powerful country in the world, and we're losing our competitive advantage. Secondly, when you think about this, if you go out 10, 20 years, there's going to be 120 million jobs that are going to require high-skill, high-paying jobs. And at the rate we're only going to have 50 million kids to fill those jobs, which means 70 million are going to be filled by children from China and India. That is not a good state for any of us. And then thirdly, we're spending twice as much money than we were 30 years ago, and the results aren't any better. So I do think as a country we need to make this a top priority, and it's not just in Washington, it's all of us doing our part. Whether you have kids or not, we've got to do our part. There's far too many kids that are languishing in schools that aren't doing well, but there's also kids that live in nice neighborhoods and their schools aren't serving them to the degree that they need to as well.
So I concur with him. You know, we are in a position right now in this country where if you were to tell me the zip code that a child lives in and the race of that child, we could with pretty good accuracy tell you what their academic achievement levels are. That's one of the most un-American things that I can possibly imagine. It's betraying the ideals by which we live as Americans, and I think that this country was founded on the idea that based on how much money a kid has and which family they're born into, they're only going to rise to a certain level. I think that is, you know, if nothing else serves as a cry to the American public to engage right now in public education, to transform this system, it's that fact. But I also want to say that I think that we are at a very unique moment in time right now in this country. Over the last few months, we have, I think, education reform has begun to seep into the mainstream with things like the movie Waiting for Superman. NBC did something called Education Nation, where they focused an entire week on education issues. And because of those sorts of things, they're bringing education reform into the mainstream, and they're bringing these issues to everyday people. And I think that there is a moment in time that we have right now that we've never seen before in this country, that we have the opportunity to actually fix the problem. And so I'm feeling somewhat heartened as well right now that that now is it.
All right, both of you obviously had experience in urban school districts. You as a superintendent, you as a mayor. What role should cities play, big cities, in urban school districts in terms of governance, control, leadership? What role should cities play?
Well, I think that, you know, there's only so much that can be done at the federal level, and there's only so much that can even be done at the state level. I think that the real work in education happens at the local level. And, you know, in terms of governance, to be quite frank, I don't think that the current governance structure of the vast majority of our school districts right now, which is a school board structure, I do not think that structure works. because you've got, 9, 10, 11 school board members all representing their local neighborhood. Oftentimes they're elected with lots of union dollars in a very low turnout election. And then you've got this body of people who are not experts in the field, who are determining policy. And mostly, if you have ever seen a school board meeting, not that you would want to necessarily go to one, but if you ever went to one, what you would see is that there's very little to no mention of children, schools, or student achievement. Everything is about adult issues, and that is a huge problem when you have this dispersed accountability where basically there is no one person in charge. Then you have low academic achievement levels, you have decisions being made for absolutely no good reason whatsoever, and no one at the end of the day to hold accountable for that. So I am a huge proponent of mayoral control in schools. I don't think that mayoral control in and of itself is great. I think you need mayoral control, and then you need a great mayor who's willing to prioritize this issue. But where we've seen the most significant movement in this nation in cities like Boston and New York and Chicago, they've had mayoral control in those states.
And D.C.
And D.C. I didn't get to finish the job, but we started.
I'll just add a couple things, and I think it's important to know that, any mayor, you have Mayor Mark here, who's in Little Rock, and then Mayor Patrick Hayes, who's in North Little Rock. Mayors have to care about their public school system. They do not have a choice. There is no way that we can have a great city without great schools. And any mayor who thinks that's not in their job description is being foolish. I chair the U.S. Conference of Mayors Task Force on Public Education, and I also chair Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education's Task Force for Mayors. And what I am trying to do is get mayors to understand there's a spectrum of involvement. It's on the far extreme is mayors controlling schools, and the very basic level is mayors taking their city services and aligning them with the school districts. So no matter what a mayor's appetite is, a mayor has to be involved in their public schools. So I'm proud that just a couple days ago, the U.S. Conference of Mayors came out really strong on a policy, and Michelle will talk about it a little later, but it's the third time that we've done it. The first one was we supported President Obama's agenda with Race to the Top. And then we supported, which mayors typically don't do, and then we supported Common Core standards, because we think standards and really high expectations are important, especially if we want to compete internationally. But the last one we did was, again, this week, it was called Last In, First Out, LIFO, and it is a very, very significant policy that is not good for children. And essentially, it's seniority-based layoffs. You lay off teachers based on seniority. That is not in the best interest of kids. You're talking about teachers who've been there forever that may not be performing well. The quality of their work is not even considered. And oftentimes you have some young new teachers that are knocking it out of the park, and because they're the last in, they're the first out. That is not putting a child's interests ahead of adults. And I think that's one of the common themes that you're going to hear us talking about. And anybody who really cares about reform is going to say students first or kids first, no matter what we decide to do. And I think mayors have a responsibility to play an active role. At the end of the day, the federal level, you can lay out very important things that are important. At state level, you can talk about legislative policies, but the real work is always going to be done at the local level.
All right, I want to follow up on that because having served on a school board and been to several meetings, we attempted at one point to set up regular meetings with the city board, and it was a struggle. The city board and the school board were not communicating very well. But many students in urban areas, you talk about the role of cities in terms of accountability, they walk through unsafe neighborhoods, drainage ditches that are full, sidewalks that aren't there, crime on the streets, poor lighting, and yet you talk about cities having control over the schools. But in the neighborhoods that surround the schools, in many urban areas, it's dismal. So how do you equate the two?
So
Go ahead, honey. You can go. I'm gonna tell you a little story. I in my last year on the job in D.C., one morning I decided to visit one of our high schools. It was one of the lowest performing high schools in D.C. And I showed up first thing in the morning. When I showed up at schools, I never stopped by the office and told anybody that I was there, because when I did, then everybody would be on their best behavior. You know, they'd be radioing, "She's in the building." You know, everybody would be. So I would just go and walk around without being announced, because I really wanted to know what was happening in these particular schools. And on this one morning, I walked in. First classroom I went into had 5 kids. Second classroom 9 kids. Third classroom 7 kids. I'm trying to figure out where are all the children. It was the strangest thing. So finally I walked into one classroom and I asked the teacher. I said, "Where are all the children?" And she said, "Oh, well, today is Friday." I said, "Really?" Because I didn't think that was a very good reason for kids not being in school. And I said, is that it? That's the only reason? She said, "No." And I thought, whew, that's good. I thought maybe she was going to tell me that the kids were on a field trip or something. She said, "It's raining too." And I thought, since when is the weather and the day of the week a determinant of our expectations of whether children are coming to school or not? So anyways, I'm continuing my tour around. I finally walk into one classroom full of children. Like 35 kids in the classroom. There weren't actually enough seats for all the kids. Some kids were sitting on the radiator. So I'm watching this class, this very dynamic teacher. He's teaching this lesson, very engaging. I went up to one of the students and I said, "So what do you think about your teacher?" And he said, "Oh, this is my best teacher. Absolutely." I said, "Really, why?" He said, "Well, 2 reasons." So first of all, he teaches us something new every day. And second of all, he will explain something to you if you don't understand it. I thought, that's kind of a low bar for who your favorite teacher is, but okay. So I watched the rest of the lesson. It was a very good lesson. After the end of my tour, I'm walking out of the building. This is about 10 o'clock in the morning. And the young man who I had talked to and 2 of his friends are walking out of the building in front of me. So I tap him on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me, young man, where do you think you're going?" And he said, "Oh, well, that was our first period class with a great teacher, so we came to that. But our second period teacher sucks, so we're going to roll." Not what the American public thinks of when they think of a truant, right? You think the kids are staying in bed until noon and then getting up and, hitting the streets and doing all kinds of stuff they're not supposed to be doing. You don't expect that the children are making the conscious decision to wake up early in the morning to show up for the first period class because they know they're going to get something great from that teacher, and then leaving after that. That's the kind of calculus that we make as adults every day, right? Where are you going to spend your time? Where are you going to get something out of it? And so it gives you an indication that things are not always what they seem. Kids are going to make the conscious decisions. I was in Harlem a few weeks ago, and I was meeting with a group of students. And I'm a big believer in talking with kids about real issues. So I said to them, I said, "You know what? Lots of people believe that because kids are poor and because they are black or Latino, that they can't learn because of all of the environmental factors and the violence in your community and all this sort of thing. What do you think about that?" Kids were like, "Absolutely disagree." And they started telling me all the reasons why. This one little girl raised her hands and she said, "I would want you to tell the American people that it is not about where we come from every day, it's where we're going to that counts." So this is what the kids want us to know about the quality of education that we're providing. That they'll persevere through all the challenges on the way to school as long as we are making what happens within the school building worthwhile for them.
Skip, a couple things that I think are important, in terms of your original question. We have something in Sacramento, it's called the City Schools Partnership. And it's basically the city of Sacramento sitting down with the 4 superintendents, because we have 4 different school districts in the city of Sacramento. And we are asking them, how can we better align our services to meet your needs? And there's 3 areas. One is school safety, kind of the route to school and from school, to your point. The second area that we can align our city services is around facilities, joint use, libraries, community centers, pools, parks, a host of things. And the third is after school or out of school programs. Now, as a city, we do a lot of these things, but we're just doing them all willy-nilly, as opposed to doing what works. So I think there's a responsibility for all of us as mayors to actually align our services to make sure they are making sense. And when Michelle talked about it earlier, mayors controlling schools, it really makes sense because a mayor can take all of the resources that are at their disposal and work with a school system, and then that way it would not be as disjointed or incoherent like it currently is. A lot of things we do in this country just don't make sense, and you don't need to come to the Clinton School to probably realize that, but we live it on a regular basis. So I think part of what you see from us is, yes, our frustration on one hand, but we also have a sense of we're kind of these transformational leaders. Our mentality is to go in and change things and not just accept them because that's the way they've been. We base every decision on results for kids. If it's working, then let's replicate it and let's invest even more in what works. If it's not working, then we don't have time to make excuses. And there's no city that's going to reach its potential without taking care of its most valuable resource, and that's its children. And unfortunately, around this country, it is not happening near enough.
All right. Today, Providence dismissed 1,926 teachers. Do you agree with that? And then let me follow that up with, what do you think is the role of teachers' unions in education reform?
Okay, this is about to get exciting.
I think that's my cue. I actually say this. People all the time ask me, they say, shouldn't the unions change? How are we going to get the unions to do this, or how are we going to get the unions to do that? And I always say, I think we're focused on the wrong thing when we're asking those kinds of questions, right? The job of the teachers union is to protect the priorities, the privileges, and the pay of their members. And they are doing a really good job of that. Okay, so we can't begrudge them just because that's their job and they're doing it, and then what we want to feel, no. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The problem is not the teachers' unions, folks. The problem is that we have created an environment in this country where we have allowed this particular interest group to have a tremendous amount of influence over policy and legislation and what we do. And on the other side, there is no national organized interest group with the same heft as the teachers union who's advocating on behalf of children and children alone.
Are you going to do something about that?
So that's why I started my organization, Students First, is to do exactly that, is to provide some balance in the landscape, to have, because I'm telling you that the teachers union has about 4 million members across the country. You cannot tell me that there are not at least twice as many, 10 times as many Americans in this country who would be willing to join an organization, an interest group that's looking out for the best interests of children. I believe that Americans are actually ready for this. I think that people are tired of the poor performance of American kids and the fact that we are not serving our children well in schools. And I think they're ready to make a difference. We've seen this. My organization's been up for about 10 weeks now. And it's been amazing. We have over 170,000 members at this point. We've had millions of dollars come in through the door, just people saying, we want to help. And so I believe that over the next few years, we will be able to build this into the most influential interest group in the country, and one that is, again, advocating on behalf of the interests of kids. And I think once we do that, then what the teachers' unions decide to do or not do will be irrelevant, because the American people will be saying it's important to put children first. Oh.
Yeah, Providence.
So I've been traveling all day, so I have not heard the news out of Providence, and I don't know exactly what's going on there. I will say a couple of things. If what they did was fired all the teachers, then I think is probably not the best move that I've ever heard. Mostly because there are hundreds, thousands of incredibly hard-working, very effective teachers who work way too hard for way too little money every single day. And you cannot, in anything that we do, we cannot make sort of these sweeping judgments about an entire profession. or entire group of professionals. I just think that's wrong. I think that people need to sort of tone down the theatrics a little and actually get to more of what the sort of root of the issue is. I think if we had better evaluation systems in this country for teachers, where we could differentiate and we knew who the top performers were and we knew who the promising people were and we knew who the ineffective ones were, then we could make decisions based on people's performance that was going to benefit kids. But to sort of, do these sorts of sweeping things because they sort of cause a lot of drama and that sort of thing, I just don't think it's not good or healthy for a district. It's not good or healthy for the children. I think what we need to do is be much, much smarter about how we treat teachers as professionals, recognizing and rewarding the best, the most effective, but then also for those who are not doing their jobs and who are not adding value for kids, you either quickly have to improve your performance or you have to go.
I'll just add a couple points to what Michelle said. This is the misnomer on the work we do. There's no group of people that should be esteemed more than teachers. It is the most noble profession. We believe that you should be rewarded, recognized, professionally developed. We've got to do everything that we can to lift the bar. If you look at other countries, they're taking the brightest and the best, and those folks are going into the education field, and they're revered. We do not do that in our country. So don't confuse us saying, when we're saying taking on the union, we do not feel like the union speaks wholeheartedly for the rank and file. She has a great story about a vote on her contract, which really flipped it on its head. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, but however, if the teachers union are going to be an impediment to a child learning, then that's problematic. My grandfather was a sheet metal worker, and he said the union's job is to protect and to create an environment where you have good wages, benefits, and retirement, all those sorts of things. That's the union's jobs. But if a union ever gets in the way of preventing children from learning, then we have a problem. And that's my grandfather, who's a card-carrying member for Local 169, a sheet metal worker. So here's my simple story. I grew up in Oak Park, a poor part of Sacramento. Do you guys have a poor part in Little Rock? What part do you call it?
I'm not going.
Okay. So the poor part of Sacramento, unlike Little Rock, called Oak Park. And I went to college, UC Berkeley, played in the NBA for 12 years, came back to my hometown, started running charter schools. And we were starting an elementary school, K through 8 elementary school. The same time we were starting the school, my high school, Sacramento High School, the second oldest high school west of the Mississippi, was about to be taken over by the state of California because it was underperforming and had underperformed for like 10 years straight. Essentially, only 20% of seniors were graduating and going on to college, which meant 80% weren't. And that was going on year after year. So I have this idea. I go to the superintendent at the time and the school board and said, can we run Sacramento High School as a charter school? And they were like, absolutely. You can do a better job than we're doing. And I was thinking, of course I could. So I go in and I speak to a group of teachers at Sac High, and I'm looking at this part of the room here. There was probably 100 teachers in the room. I told them what we wanted to do. I said, look, we want high expectations for our kids. We want to create a private school education for free. We want to raise the bar. We want to have a rigorous curriculum. We want to have a longer school day. And by the time I finished, I got a standing ovation by the teachers. And one teacher ran up to me, she was crying, and she said, thank you for restoring the faith in teachers. Came back a week later, followed up on my same spiel, and I got booed by the same group of 100 people. I'm thinking, what in the heck happened in a week's time? The teachers union started spreading propaganda. Your jobs won't be safe. You won't get paid what you were making before. And it really just turned a very promising opportunity into something very negative. Let's fast forward. The next 10 months, we were in a battle with the teachers union on whether or not that we would allow them to preserve the status quo or try something different because children's lives are weighing in the balance. They spent $750,000 to prevent us from running this school as a new charter school. A law firm in the community gave us $500,000 of pro bono legal services. We end up prevailing. So here's where we are today. That high school, which was underperforming, 20% of seniors graduating and going on to college. Now, same group of kids, 80% graduating, going on to four-year college. 80%. So the point is, don't tell me kids in certain neighborhoods can't learn. Don't tell me that your zip code is going to determine your future. Don't tell me if kids don't have access to a high-quality education, they cannot do equally as well or better than their counterparts who live in affluent areas. And if a teachers union or anybody is going to prevent kids from having that opportunity, then we're going to fight like crazy to do our part. And I think that's what our commitment's about, and that's why we need you folks out here to also participate in some shape or form.
All right, let's talk about charter schools. Some people think they're the end-all to beat-all. Others, like Diane Revich, thinks that they're way overrated and that they're not much better than public schools, in some cases worse. You know, I've heard lots of people talk about if it's a charter school, it's automatically going to be great. Number one, not all schools are going to be charters. And number two, how do you monitor bad charter schools?
Does everyone know what a charter school is, first of all? So charter
Raise your hand if you don't know what a charter school is.
Pretty much everybody knows what a charter school is. So a charter school is a public school, utilizes public taxpayer dollars, but it's freed up from all of the bureaucracies and rules and regulations that most public schools are. So it's run by its own board as opposed to the school board. So I think the problem in a lot of the debates in public education today is people want to frame things on one side of the extreme or the other. Charter schools are the answer to all the ills, or charter schools are terrible. The fact of the matter is that just as we don't want to paint all children with the same broad brushstrokes or all teachers with the same broad brushstrokes, you can't paint charter school with the same broad brushstrokes. There are some unbelievable charter schools in this country who are at scale doing what a traditional public school districts have never been able to do, which is ensuring that poor and minority children are achieving at the highest levels. They're closing the achievement gap that exists in this country between white and black kids and poor and rich kids. That's the bottom line. There are also, however, in this country, some extraordinarily bad charter schools. And the problem that we face right now is that we have not been diligent about closing down poor performing charter schools, because the whole notion, the whole premise behind charter schools is higher degrees of authority on autonomy for higher degrees of accountability. So we've given the charter schools the authority and the autonomy, but we don't have the accountability side, meaning if you're not performing, we're going to close you down. And that's part of the problem that exists right now. I think that people like Rayavich and others who just sort of want to say, well, on average this and on average that, that belies the point. The point is that there are some amazing charter schools in this country who have actually figured out how to do this and who do it extraordinarily well. And we cannot mask the incredible results that they have seen simply because there are some poor performing ones. What we ought to be doing is shutting down the poor performing ones and then giving the high performing ones more resources so that they can go to scale and serve more kids.
And I think my answer is pretty simple too. Charter schools are not the panacea. They're just not. However, competition is a good thing. And we don't want our school districts to just run unchallenged. And when you create an environment where it's competitive, then everybody starts to get a little bit better and try a little bit harder. And those who do well are going to attract more kids, and those that aren't going to do well are going to have less kids in terms of enrollment. And that's what you see happening around the country. So in California, you have, it's called a U shape. So you have some really bad charters here, then most of the charters. Then you have some really good charters, great charters. So there's a U-shaped curve in California. A lot of bad ones, this is the regular schools, pretty much the same, and then the high performing totally outspike the other schools. So the challenge for us is, in California and anywhere, we have 952 charters in California, is the bad ones, you have to close down. You cannot let them continue to go on. And if you do that, then all we would be talking about is really the high performing charter schools. And you know, in our community, and I'll just give you an example, our elementary school is called PS7. We have 95% African American kids in the school, in a poor neighborhood, 95%. It has the third highest test scores in the whole city. 95% African American kids. Now, what are we doing there? How do we even get the opportunity to run this school? We got the opportunity to run this school as a charter because the school district said, we don't know how to educate black boys that are poor. They said, we're just being honest, we don't know how to do it. Can you do it? And we felt that, don't kids need good teachers and high expectations? Don't they need longer school days if they're a little further behind? Don't you need to use data to determine whether kids are learning and teachers are teaching? There's no rocket, what is the word? It's not rocket science or a silver bullet. She finishes most of my sentences. But what we did is we created a different environment in this community. And now this school is, you know, Michelle talked about closing the achievement gap. This school actually has a reverse gap. The minority kids in this community are outperforming the white kids in the whole city in a poor neighborhood. And here's just the one thing that would probably seal it for you folks who aren't aware. If you go to our kindergarten classroom, it'll say outside their classroom, class of 2027. It's the year they're graduating for college. You cannot tell these kids, even though their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents have never been to college, you cannot tell these kids they are not going to college. They've probably visited the Clinton School more times than I have. These kids take college field trips every 2 or 3 weeks. And that's what their future looks like. When you create that environment of high expectations and you remove some of the freedom, you create more freedom and autonomy that you don't have in school districts, you're going to get a different outcome. And that's what we want, autonomy, but we also want the accountability to be held to a standard and be accountable for whatever goes on. That is not what you see happening in most school districts around the country. Our school, our teachers, they work longer school days. Happily, they volunteer. In a school district, they can't work a longer day. They'd be, what's the word, grievance in there? What was?
Yeah, they file a grievance.
They'd file a grievance if you ask them to stay an extra few minutes after school. I mean, you can't, yeah, anyway, I'm done. Go ahead.
When you're out there in the public arena, as both of you are, and you take strong stands and controversial stands, you face criticism. That's true of anybody. Michelle, you've come under some criticism about what people have alleged about your performance as a teacher. And I just wanted to ask you about that and give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Wait, hold on, before she does that. You got to tell them about your mom and just your personality for criticism. I think it would be helpful for the audience to hear. And then you can justify your test scores.
My first year on the job in D.C., I made the decision within the first 100 days or so that I was going to close 23 schools in the district. It was 15% of the total schools in the inventory. And just in case you don't know, if you quickly want to become the least popular person in a city, all you have to do is tell someone that you're closing a school, much less 23 schools. So we announced this, and the city went nuts, and my mother was visiting, and she woke up one morning and she opened the Washington Post. There was this 2-page spread of the entire city pinpointing all of the schools that I was closing, and she turned on the TV, and there were pictures of people picketing outside my office, and people screaming at me and that sort of thing. And I got home that night after lots of community meetings, and I walked in the door, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I was making myself a peanut butter sandwich. And she said, "When you were little, you never used to care about what people thought about you. And I always thought that you were going to grow up to be antisocial." She said, "But I see now that this is serving you well." And I said, "Yes." It's interesting too, because in the middle of my tenure, there was a columnist at the Washington Post who wrote a piece about me, and he said, "I like Michelle Rhee. She's doing all the right things, and we're seeing really good results. I just wish she would be nicer." And so I read the piece, and I called the guy up, and I said, "So what's this all about?" and he's like, well, here's the thing. I just feel like if you were a little nicer, then you could stay longer. And I think staying longer is a good thing. And so can't you just, just be a little nicer? And I said, well, you need to figure out what you believe the most important characteristics of a school's chancellor are. And if you think sort of being nice and friendly and accommodating are the most important things, then you should actually be advocating for my ouster. Okay? Because if you want warm and fuzzy, I am not your girl. But if you like the results and you think that we're heading in the right direction, then what you should be advocating for is not for me to become nicer, but for us as adults to put the personalities aside and actually focus on what we're producing for kids. So let's stop, what we're doing right now is just turning a blind eye to what is happening to kids every single day in classrooms in the name of harmony amongst adults. If we're causing a little controversy, and making the adults a little uncomfortable, but the kids are better off, then that's what we need to be focused on. So that's the test scores, yes. Oh, thank goodness, yes. So about 20 years ago, I taught elementary school in Baltimore, Maryland. I taught for 3 years. In my second and third year of teaching, I was fortunate enough to loop with a group of students. So I had some of them in the second grade and the third grade. At the end of that third year, as I was heading off to graduate school, my principal called me and said, I just wanted to let you know that the kids knocked the test out of the park. In fact, of the children that you happen to have had in both the second and the third grade, whereas they started out with extraordinarily low test scores, now 90% of them are scoring at the 90th percentile or above. And I thought, wow, that's great, and put it on my resume, was very proud of it. Little did I know that 20 years later, I would become a public official. And people were combing my resume, and they said, oh, here's some statistics about how her kids did. And so they wanted to know, well, do you have the proof? And back then we didn't have any proof of this kind of stuff. So they called my principal in to testify in front of the city council, and they said, did you tell her that that was the case? And my principal said, yes. And they said, do you have any proof that this is the case? She said, no. And then they said, Ms. Rhee, do you have any proof? And I said, no. But this is what we both remembered. About a few weeks ago, somebody found an old study that was done on a group of schools in Baltimore, and they said, this shows that Michelle Rhee is lying, because they sort of pulled up the data from my school and looked at all of the children in the second and third grade, not just the kids in my school. And they said, well, that group of kids saw growth, but they didn't, 90% of them weren't at the 90th percentile or above. And so that proves she's a liar. But in fact, it didn't, because what was the case was that they were looking at the entire grade of kids, not just the kids who were in my class. And what Baltimore told us was that there was no way to sort of choose the exact kids who were in my class. What is actually visible in those test scores, though, is the fact that the group of children that went through the second and third grade, the years that I taught the second and third grade, out of all of the schools in the treatment group and in the control group, the group of kids that we taught at our school started out with the lowest test scores when they began as second graders, and they ended up, out of all the control and treatment groups, as the highest scorers in reading and math, the highest test scores. So even though we can't go back and pull the individual kids and show that, what is absolutely unequivocal is that the kids, some of the kids that were in my classroom, saw absolutely unbelievable gains. But this, I think, from a public policy perspective, is one of the reasons why it is so important, I think, where we are now in being able to give teachers information, student by student information, and reports back about exactly how much their kids are growing or not, so that it's not left to speculation, that it's not left to people's memory from 20 years ago, that you have the evidence right in front of you of whether or not you're moving the student achievement levels for the kids in your class.
Let me just add one thing. In California, we have 300,000 teachers. We don't use data in California to determine whether teachers are teaching effectively. So if you look at the top 10% of the 300,000, meaning 30,000 teachers. And if you look at the bottom 10%, 30,000 teachers, you can't tell who's who in California. So what you typically would want is your top teachers to mentor your bottom teachers to hopefully develop them. But we don't allow data to be used that way in California. And that's why California is one of the worst performing states. So our whole belief is you've got to look at data, and test scores are not an end all. You don't evaluate every teacher only on test scores, but there has to be some mechanism to determine whether or not kids are learning, and then you can have a host of other ways to evaluate a teacher's effectiveness.
All right, good discussion. Now it's your turn. Those who have questions, would you please raise your hands, and then I will we'll get a microphone to you. All right, let's see. Hillary, right here.
Hi, my name is Hillary Trudell. I'm a Clinton School student. Thank you so much for being here. My question is about parents. You've talked a lot about teachers and holding them accountable and also giving them resources, but I know a few teachers in D.C. actually used to live there, and despite their efforts, sometimes they would have students that would fail, and a lot of the challenges that they ran into were the parents. So I guess my question is, where do you see the role of parents changing within these new initiatives? Thank you.
Well, I think it's very clear, and I don't think that anybody would argue with you, that we need more parental involvement. We need parents to be engaged, and that when parents are engaged, that student learning is going to increase. So anything that school districts can do, that individual teachers can do to encourage more parents to come into schools and to be involved is absolutely of critical importance. I think my worry is often that a lot of times in the education reform debates, people say, well, the reason why kids in the poor inner cities aren't doing well is because their parents aren't involved. And there's this sort of blame game going on, right? If the parents were more involved, then the kids would do better. And I think that's extraordinarily problematic, because we have, just in the last few months in this country, seen some very, very stark examples of parents who have been trying to be very involved in their kids' education. So if you saw the movie Waiting for Superman, you saw thousands and thousands of parents across the country desperate to get their children into a decent school, out of their failing neighborhood school, and they're doing everything that they can to make it happen. You had a group of parents in Compton, California, who were the first parents who decided to use what a new law the mayor actually helped to put forth, which is called the parent trigger, which means that if 51% of the parents sign a petition, that they can force the restructuring of a school. And then the last example is a mother in Akron, Ohio, who decided that she had to falsify her residency documents so that her kids could go to a safer, higher performing school. So you have three examples of parents, that are trying to get involved, and then look at what happened with each of these groups of parents. In the first case, we say, sorry, I know you want your kids to be in a great school, but there's no room for them here, right? The second group of parents were threatened with deportation and harassment and everything else because of the decision that they made to pull the trigger. And then the third lady we throw in jail. Right? So I don't think that we are communicating to parents that we want them to be involved. I think what we're communicating to them is we would like to continue to blame you, and so we're better off if you just, we don't want your involvement. We can't dictate how parents are going to get involved. We can't ask for them to be involved and then be mad when they do get involved, because we don't like the way they've chosen to do it. And I think that's part of what we're going to try to do through Students First, quite frankly, is we're gonna radicalize the moms of America. And then the education system better watch out, because you want parents involved, I'm gonna get parents involved. And then when we start making demands on the system, you better be ready to deliver.
Let me follow up on that parent trigger, which passed in California in 51%. Do you see that as part of a national movement? Do you see that parent trigger law spreading through other states?
Yeah, absolutely. It's already spread in a half a dozen other states. What it really does is takes the power and gives it to the parents. That's where it should be. Parents should be able to demand a very good education for their children, and oftentimes that's not the case. So California started an organization called Parent Revolution. Unfortunately, in California, there's a group of people talking about repealing it already because they don't want parents to have the power. So the role of the media plays a critical role too, and this is for the kids here, not kids, the grad students here. The role of media plays a critical role. So our editorial board in Sacramento is just hammering away at everybody who's opposing parent trigger, because why in the world would you not want parents to have the right, like rich, affluent families do? You send your kid to a private school. If you can't afford a private school, then you move into a good neighborhood where you have a good public school. And if you can't find a good neighbor in a good public school, you move outside the city and then you move into another community. And if not, then you'll figure out how to use somebody else's address to make sure they go into a good school. Well, poor neighborhoods, we don't get that. You know, our kids are trapped in bad schools. Parent trigger starts to level the playing field, and it is spreading around the country.
Further questions? That's it. Yes, right here. Hold on just a minute.
Hi, thank you. For being here. I am a Clinton School student in my second year. I'm also a concurrent student at the College of Public Health here as well. And your goal is to change the social environments within the schools, and we talk a lot about the determinants of health, which includes all social environments, so not just within the school, but surrounding the school. And so I wanted to know, where does community development fit into your plan, or who do you see influencing that so that the community builds up as the schools are reformed?
Who are you asking that question to? So you guys have heard of Jeffrey Canada, the Harlem Children's Zone. It's exactly what you're talking about. The President Obama has something called the Promised Neighborhood Initiative, where you're trying to create an environment where the schools are centers of communities, but everything around it plays a critical role, from baby colleges all the way through work development. And in Sacramento, Michelle and I, in fact, met many years ago. I have an organization called St. Hope, and its mission is to revitalize the inner city communities through economic development, civic leadership, public education, and the arts. So that's a holistic perspective. And I grew up in a poor neighborhood, so I knew that schools were very important, but I don't believe you can improve public education without economic development being a part of the equation. And if you don't figure out a way to create jobs and train people for the workforce, if you don't figure out how to get your dollars that you're investing in those poor communities to circulate within a community, it's going to be very difficult. So our goal is to revitalize a community. Public education and economic development go hand in hand in that.
Right. Yes, sir. Right over here.
I'm sorry. You
right
have
here.
You have to tell your Starbucks story really quickly.
I'll tell that at the end if we have time.
Okay. I'm an election commissioner. Would you address voter apathy? And I'd also like to tell you, in Arkansas, school elections are held in the odd years. So this is not tied into who's running for governor, who's running for president. As an election commissioner, I think school elections are the most important election. But apathy, if I can have 1 second, in my county, we've got 80% voter registration. But during a school election, I've seen as few as 19 people vote. That's ridiculous. Would you address voter apathy, please?
I alluded to this earlier. It's part of the reason why the school board governance structures are so problematic, is that oftentimes they're very low turnout elections. And so you're talking about a very, very small number of people making the determinations about who's on the school board, which means that not a whole lot of money from teachers' unions can actually influence those elections. And the reason why that is problematic in a lot of ways is that if you look at, in the vast majority of states across the country, the policies that govern staffing of schools and who teaches which kids and when, et cetera, are determined through the collective bargaining process. When you have a slate of school board members who are elected through union dollars, then you essentially have the union on both sides of the bargaining table, right? So if the union got me elected, then I'm not going to go hardcore after the union for a better contract, because I'm reliant on them to get reelected next time. That's what is really problematic, and that's what we have to find a way to get the public more engaged in public education. You've got to know when your school board elections are. You have to know exactly what those people stand for and who they're going to stand for when it comes to actually running the school district.
Questions? Yes. Let's have a city year question right here, right in the front row. City year.
Hi, my name is Siddhartha Aneja, and I currently serve in City Year. So my question is this: programs like City Year and Teach for America often recruit from sort of a select group of students. How do we make sure that sort of all groups of students can serve their country?
First of all, I love City Year. Love City Year.
How about that for an endorsement, city year?
City Year was a huge component of our success in Washington, D.C. When I first got to the city, I went to a City Year opening ceremonies, got to see all the excitement, and I came back and talked to the City Year folks, and I said, I have an idea. I want a City Year Corps member in every single one of my schools. And they said, that's interesting. But we have a better idea, and basically what they said was that they had a new program that they wanted to start, the Whole School, Whole Child program, which clustered groups of City Year Corps members in individual failing schools to help turn around the culture and environment. They felt like if we had 10 or 12 City Year Corps members all clustered together, that could really help to change the culture of the school. So we started that in D.C., and it absolutely had an amazing impact on the schools that they were in. The City Year Corps members were there early in the morning, they were there late at night, they were tutoring kids during the day, they were running the after-school programs and the parental engagement programs. It was absolutely unbelievable. And one of the things that I found to be the most heartening was that the young people who had exposure to the City Year folks aspired to be like them. And so ultimately we had people who were in our DCPS schools then becoming City Year Corps members. And I think that is the ideal scenario where young kids who are in school have exposure to programs like City Year. They see the power that individual young folks can have on people like them, and then they want to contribute back to their community through the same types of programs.
Right, we have a question. Let's see. Yes, ma'am, right here.
I just wanted to thank you guys first for identifying the problems, identifying the solutions, and then enacting those solutions so that we can visibly see how we can make a difference. I truly want to applaud you on that. My question is to the mayor. We recently had a school board issue in the Little Rock School District where our school board superintendent was pushed out. There was a buyout. And I happen to be one of the leaders of the community involvement for the Little Rock School District for our students. And over and over again, my issue was that we're missing the mark because the students are doing better and achieving better with this current superintendent. And I reached out to the mayor of Little Rock, and I reached out to the governor of the state of Arkansas, and never heard from either of them. And it was quite disappointing. And so I want to know from you, how can we press the mayor and our city and state government officials to really be more involved in our education, because we tout and say that we want to improve our economic standards, but you can't do that without greater education. So tell me how we can do that.
So thank you for the question. My answers will be pretty brisk. One is the mayors and your governor, they have to be involved. And if you didn't hear from them, then I'm going to say we didn't try hard enough, meaning we got to go down there and we got to wait for them to come out of the city hall. And if one or two people don't get enough attention, then take your whole group of people or cohort. At some point, all of us want to solve problems in our community. I can tell you, your mayor, Mark, is a very committed person in terms of public education. I wish I would have known this sooner, because I would have made sure that he followed up with you today. In fact, I will make sure he follows up with you. That's my commitment. The second thing I want to say that I think is important, think about Little Rock and the history of the Little Rock Nine. I mean, you guys have the richest history in the country. I got a chance in Sacramento a few months ago to hear one of the Little Rock Nine speak in Sacramento. An amazing lady, Carlita, I think it's her. Carlotta,
yeah.
Carlotta, an amazing lady. Just listening to her story. And I shared this with her, and I'll share it here. I've been in Little Rock probably about a dozen times in my lifetime. Almost every time that I'm here, I usually rent a car, I go back to my hotel, and at about 10, 11 o'clock at night, I get in the car and I go drive out to where Central High School is. And I just sit there, and I drive around that beautiful campus, and the images and the pictures, they start coming to life, and you just think of the battles that went on at that particular school so that someone like me could go to an integrated school. Now my responsibility is to make sure those schools are going to do their job, because in some cases we were better off when we didn't have integration. Holy moly. So I'm not satisfied with that. And then the last thing that I just want to say to you is it's important to know, and I challenge everyone in here, you would think that results would be enough. You said there were results occurring at that school. She entered Washington, D.C., the worst urban school district in the country, turned it around in 3 years, had the biggest gains out of any urban school district in the country on math and English, double digits, and did not get to continue her work. The interest groups, the special interest groups, and the politics that go on oftentimes override the results and what should really matter.
Well, let's hear from an elected official. The Honorable Patrick Hayes, the mayor of North Little Rock, is here. Mayor Hayes.
Welcome, Kevin, Michelle. You didn't, of course, and I don't know how lucky we were, but Waiting on Superman is something I really hadn't heard that much of before, day before yesterday, when the two of y'all presented that video or that film, and then in addition had the panel discussion that was just after it that you moderated. And yet the other point, as we go down the road just a second before I get my question, was Adrian Finney, who was your mayor, Michelle, did not survive the election, and I think it was pretty badly, but I think you quoted a little bit of what, or someone quoted what he said afterwards in asking him to recall whether or not he'd done anything different, and the answer was absolutely not. And I know that I've got 3 grandchildren that are in, 2 of which are in the North Rock Public School System, and I just want to applaud y'all, but I want to also tell you how your heart goes out when you see that Waiting on Superman, and you see where kids, parents, are committed to their kids, and yet at the same time you've got 300 or 400 vacancies and 20 or 30 spots, and the lottery was what selected those kids, and we can't wait. I mean, you're absolutely correct. We can't wait, and so I just want to, first of all, my question is, when are the rest of us, or when are we going to have a more general distribution, be able to see Waiting on Superman? And the second thing, all of us are concerned about where we are as a country, and I know that some of the facts that were cited up in Washington day before yesterday about how we're 18th and 19th and 20th and 21st, and in terms of what's going on globally, we can't wait. So I guess I'd just ask both, when are we going to be able to see Waiting on Superman? Number 2, how are we doing when it comes to, which is not very good, the rest of the globe? And welcome here. Thank you very much for being a part of it.
You got to give Mayor Hayes a round of applause. He came in town just to be here today, came back in town. So thank you. Is that your wife there? Awesome. Thank you very much. So I'll deal with the first part. Again, so Mayor Hayes participated in a panel discussion that we had a couple days ago in Washington, D.C., and was supposed to be in D.C. and came back just to be here. But the first part, raise your hand if you've seen the movie Waiting for Superman. Impressive. Awesome. So Davis Guggenheim, who did Inconvenient Truth, was the director of this film. He has an unbelievable ability of taking issues that are important but maybe not mainstream, making them relevant, and the mainstream audience pretty soon gets them. And that's what happened with Al Gore and the Inconvenient Truth. He also took education and took a very complicated issue and brought it mainstream. So it was in the theaters for about 3 months, and now it's fully distributed on DVD. So anybody in here can get the DVD. It's out. And one of the things that both of us are encouraging folks to do is have a viewing party at your home. Invite 8, 10 people over to your house and watch this movie and discuss it. The power of this movie, it will outrage you, it will tick you off, and you will be ready to join her organization immediately, because this is what it's about. It's all of us collectively fighting together for our children or somebody else's children, even if we don't know who those folks are, because it's a tragedy in what's happening in our country. So that film is being distributed all across the country now, and you can probably talk about the second part of his question.
In terms of the second part, we absolutely are not competing when it comes to our education system versus others. One of the statistics, if you haven't seen Waiting for Superman, that's very interesting, is that they tested kids in all of the developed nations in mathematics. And the U.S. was at the absolute bottom in terms of how their test scores were, what their math skills were. But then they asked the kids, how do you think you did on the test? How good do you think you are in math? U.S. kids, #1. This shows you that we have a significant problem. And one of the problems that we're facing as a nation with our culture is that we are so busy trying to make children feel good about themselves that we're not actually spending the time building the skills so they are good at stuff. I see this in my own household. I have 2 little girls, 8 and 12, and they both play soccer. They suck at soccer. They take after their mother, not their stepfather-to-be, on the athletic skills. But if you were to walk into their rooms, you would see medals and trophies and ribbons. You'd think I am raising the next Mia Hamm by the looks of it, right? So it's very difficult because I'm trying to tell you, kid, you are not so good. In order to be good, you're going to have to practice every single day. And even if you do that, I can't guarantee you that you're ever going to be great. But it's very hard for them to reconcile that with all of the medals and the trophies and the ribbons. We have to regain our competitive spirit in America. We have to teach children that you got to work hard and do the right thing in order to be the best, and we have to stop allowing the children of our country to be proud of mediocrity. That's the only way we're going to.
Question up here from Jesse Rice. Let's wait for the microphone.
Thank you, Dean. I'm also a student at the Clinton School. Very glad you guys are here to join us. I want to go back to teachers and results. You've mentioned the need for good teachers with great results in our schools. And my question is, in a school like Little Rock Central, you mentioned it, where it's split between Black kids and white kids with a minority of other ethnicities, Asians, the growing Hispanic population. What does a good teacher look like in a school as diverse as that? And how do you measure that? You talk about results and the kids' results, but I'm interested in hearing those other ways that Mayor Johnson mentioned earlier. How do you evaluate those teachers?
So, first of all, I think that it's important to note that a teacher who's a great teacher for a Black kid doesn't look all that different from a teacher who's a great teacher for a white kid or an Asian kid or anything else. Great teachers set very high expectations for children. They don't let children make excuses, right? They hold them to those expectations, and then they give them what they need to be successful. And I think that, children know when you believe in them and when you don't believe in them. The thing that used to make me so mad when I was in D.C. every day is when kids would tell me, stories of adults who were in the school who would say to them, things like, I get paid whether you're learning or not, so what does it matter? Or you're never going to amount to anything, you're stupid, so why should I waste my time? Literally, kids would come to me and tell me that the adults in the building were saying these things to them. It's actually not rocket science. If you have high expectations for the kids, if you know that each child is an individual and you have to treat every child as an individual, communication, right? Understanding what engages kids, what's interesting to them. All of those things are what makes a great teacher. And I'll say this, at the end of the day, that the children will tell you without any equivocation that what matters most to them is having a great teacher in the classroom every day. You know, they're willing to put all the other stuff aside in terms of what the school looks like, what the buildings, whether they have computers. If they have a great teacher, they know when somebody cares about them and expects the best.
I'm just going to add one real quick. Where'd she go? Right. So she talked about high expectations. There's something before high expectations. A teacher has to believe in a kid. You have to believe that kid can learn. And that's where your high expectation comes in. That's the most important thing. If a teacher believes in a kid and builds a meaningful relationship, that kid will do anything for that teacher. So if that teacher raises the bar higher, the kid's going to jump. And if the teacher raises it even higher, the kid's going to find a way to get. That meaningful relationship is so critical. And that's unfortunately what we don't have as often as we'd like. The other thing that are important is that these teachers that are really good, they're competitive. They want to look at data and determine whether or not kids are learning, and they have a goal, and they go after the goal. If they didn't, they say they failed, not the kid. They own that accountability. Teachers that are really good are problem solvers. You know, they figure out there's a problem, I'm going to solve it and come up with a solution. And if a kid doesn't come to school and that teacher's goal is for that kid to be at school 95% of the time, the teacher's going to call home and they're going to go visit. Not because it's in their job description, because they're going to get it done. They're going to find a way that those 20 or 30 kids that are in their influence are going to learn. That is critical, and you don't have that. We have kids at our elementary school and our charter school, they take cell phones home. They have cell phones. So the kids can call that cell phone number if they're trying to do their homework at night, at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. A lot of our kids, unfortunately, don't have two parents in the household, or parents who know how to do algebra, depending on the grade. So that kid can call that teacher, and that teacher's available after 9 o'clock. And their husband and their kids understand that part of their job does not stop when they leave the campus. It goes on. And if a kid is still behind and it's Saturday, then that teacher's going to find a way to be with their family 2 or 3 hours, then go to school for a couple hours, then go home, back to their family. That's what it takes. You have to do whatever it takes, and I think that's the commitment. It's tiring. It's exhausting. But those teachers that are great, they figure out a way to make it happen, and they don't make excuses.